The blind man who trusted the wrong person. He walked into my courtroom with a white cane and $14,000 of debt that was not his. 84 years old, moving slowly. Each step careful and deliberate, the way people move when the floor is unfamiliar and the world has become a place you navigate by feel rather than sight. He found his chair and sat down. He placed his cane across his knees. He folded his hands on top of it, and then he looked in my direction. Not at me exactly, because he could not see me, but toward me, with the particular dignity of someone who has learned that you face what you cannot see the same way you face what you can. Straight on, without flinching. His name was Walter Greer, and he was in my courtroom because someone had used his blindness as a hiding place. If you believe that the people who deserve our protection most are the ones least able to demand it, please subscribe right now, because this story will stay with you. The case file on my bench that morning was thick. 61 parking violations, all issued over a period of 14 months, all registered to Walter Greer's vehicle, all adding up to $14,280 in fines, penalties, and late fees. The city's enforcement office had been patient at first. They had sent notices. They had offered payment plans. When nothing came back, they had filed in small claims court. That is how Walter ended up across from me. He had no idea the tickets existed until a letter arrived at his apartment with the words "Final Notice" printed in red across the top. He had asked his neighbor to read it to him. Then he had sat quietly in his kitchen for a long time. "I haven't been in that car in over a year," he told me when I asked. His voice was steady, but I could hear the effort behind it. "I can't drive. I lost my sight 2 years ago. My car has been sitting in the parking structure below my building. I don't even have the keys anymore." I looked at him carefully. "Who has the keys?" He was quiet for a moment. "My nephew," he said. "I want to tell you about Walter before I tell you about the nephew, because this story is not really about the nephew. Not at its heart. It is about Walter. Walter Greer had worked for 37 years as a machinist. He had built things with his hands, precise, careful things, and he had lived his life with the same precision. He paid his bills on time. He kept his word. He made dinner for his wife on their anniversary every year without fail, right up until she passed 7 years ago. After she was gone, he kept cooking anyway. Smaller portions, same recipes. He told me this quietly, almost to himself, when I asked him to describe his daily routine. I think he mentioned it because the cooking was one of the last things he could still do fully on his own, one of the last things that had not been changed by the blindness. He had lost his sight gradually, then suddenly, the way these things sometimes go. 2 years of decline, and then one morning, when he woke up and the room was simply dark, and it stayed that way. He had adjusted. That was the word he used. He had adjusted. He learned to navigate his apartment by touch and count. He learned which buses stopped near his building and how many stops to his grocery store. He learned to recognize people by their voices and their footsteps and the particular way they filled a room. He was not helpless. He was careful to say that. He did not want me to think of him as helpless. But there were things he could no longer do alone. His nephew Kevin had stepped in about 18 months ago. He was 31 years old, Walter's late sister's boy. He had shown up one Sunday with groceries and an offer to help with errands, and Walter, who had been quietly struggling and too proud to ask, had said yes. Kevin drove Walter to his medical appointments. He went to the pharmacy. He helped with the things that required seeing, reading labels, checking expiration dates, sorting mail. Walter trusted him completely, the way you trust family, the way you trust someone who knows your history, who sat at your table as a child, who called you uncle for 3 decades. That trust was what Kevin had used as a hiding place. When Kevin came into the courtroom, I noticed several things at once. He was well-dressed, confident posture, the kind of person who has learned to make a good first impression and relies on it. He greeted me politely. He said good morning. He sat down smoothly, crossed one leg over the other, and arranged his expression into something that communicated concern and reasonableness. He did not look at Walter. That was the first thing I noticed. In my experience, people who are genuinely innocent in a family dispute cannot help looking at the family member they are supposed to be defending. The eye is drawn there. The connection is involuntary. Kevin looked at me. He looked at the city's representative. He looked at his own hands when he thought about a question. He did not look at his uncle once in the first 10 minutes. I asked him to explain his relationship with Walter's vehicle. I use it sometimes to help him, he said. Take him places, run errands. He can't drive, so I help out. How often? A few times a week, maybe. Do you ever use the vehicle for your own purposes, separate from helping your uncle? He paused, a pause that was half a second longer than a person answering honestly would need. Occasionally, he said, if I need to pick something up on the way. And when you park during those occasions, where do you park? Wherever there's a spot, including restricted zones? Another pause. I might have, a couple of times. I didn't always see the signs. A couple of times, I repeated. Over 14 months, 61 violations is quite a few more than a couple of times. He shifted in his chair. I didn't realize how many there were. I looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Holloway, I said, using his last name deliberately. Not Kevin, not casual, but his full formal name, the name he would need to answer to. Are you saying you were unaware that these violations were accumulating in your uncle's name? Yes, he said. And you never discussed them with him. I didn't know about them. You didn't receive any of the notices? They would have come to the vehicle registration address, which is your uncle's apartment, where you visit regularly. He opened his mouth, closed it. I might have seen some letters, he said carefully, but I didn't realize what they were. I wrote something down. He watched me write it. I want to pause here and tell you what I was thinking in that moment. I was thinking about Walter, not about the legal puzzle of it, though the puzzle was becoming clearer. I was thinking about the man sitting 3 feet away from his nephew, unable to see his nephew's face, unable to watch the small shifts and hesitations that were telling me everything I needed to know. Walter had no way of reading this room. He was sitting there, trusting his ears, trusting his instincts, trusting the 40 years of life experience that told him when something was wrong. But he was also carrying a particular kind of hope that family members carry. The hope that the person they love did not do what the evidence suggests they did. I have seen that hope before, many times, in parents and in children and in siblings and in spouses. It is one of the most painful things to watch because the hope is real, and often the evidence is also real. And the person sitting quietly in its middle, the one who trusted, who opened the door, who said yes when someone offered to help, has to find a way to hold both of those things at once. I wanted to be careful. I wanted to be thorough. I did not want to cause more pain than the truth required. But I also needed to get to the truth completely because Walter deserved nothing less. I had requested security footage from 3 of the parking structures where the violations had been issued. I had reviewed it the night before the hearing. The footage was clear. In 22 of the incidents I reviewed, Walter's vehicle was present in the footage. In all 22, the person stepping out of the driver's side door was not Walter Greer. It was Kevin, alone, no passenger, no errand, just Kevin, parking in restricted zones, getting out, and walking away. When I placed the footage records on the table, Kevin's posture changed. Subtly, but it changed. The footage from 3 locations shows your uncle's vehicle being parked by a single individual on 22 separate occasions, I said. In none of those incidents is your uncle present in the vehicle. In none of them is there evidence of an errand being run on his behalf. Kevin looked at the table. Can you explain that? A long silence. I was using the car, he said finally. His voice was quieter now. The smoothness had drained out of it. For my own things, not for him. while the tickets were going to his address. I didn't think they'd add up like that. You saw the notices. Another silence. Longer. Some of them, he said. And you chose not to tell your uncle. He said nothing. I looked at him for a moment. Not with anger. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was not anger. It was a deep, particular sadness. Because Kevin was not a monster. People who do things like this rarely are. He was a young man who had made a small, selfish decision that he had then repeated, and then repeated again. And each repetition had made the truth harder to face, until it had become easier to simply let his blind uncle sit under the weight of it than to look him in the eye and say what he had done. That is how these things grow, not from evil, from avoidance, from cowardice disguised as convenience. I turned to Walter. He had been very still during the questioning, his hands on his cane, his face forward. "Mr. Greer," I said gently, "the evidence shows that these violations were incurred by your nephew using your vehicle for his own purposes. You bear no responsibility for any of them." Walter exhaled. It was a quiet sound, almost inaudible. But in that quiet courtroom, it carried everything. The months of confusion, the fear of the red letters, the humiliation of being summoned here, the weight of a debt that had been placed on him without his knowledge or consent. He nodded once. His jaw was tight. I could see him working to hold himself together. "I also need to tell you," I said, keeping my voice steady and direct, "that the notices were delivered to your apartment during the period when your nephew was visiting regularly. Based on his own testimony, he was aware of at least some of them." Walter did not react immediately. He sat for a moment, and then he turned his head slowly toward where Kevin was sitting. He couldn't see him, but Kevin could see Walter. And whatever Kevin saw on his uncle's face in that moment, I watched it land. I watched the full weight of it arrive. Not my words, not the legal judgment, not the footage, or the records, or the amounts. Just an old man turning toward him. The ruling was straightforward. All 61 violations were dismissed against Walter Greer. He owed nothing. The record would be cleared completely. Kevin was ordered to pay the full amount, $14,280, to the city, along with Walter's legal preparation costs. I also issued a formal finding of deceptive conduct for the record. I did not enjoy delivering that ruling. I want to be clear about that too. There are moments in this work that feel like justice, clean and clear and settled. And there are moments that feel like loss, because every ruling that exposes a betrayal is also the end of something, a relationship, a version of trust that cannot be fully restored. This was both. Before I adjourned, I spoke directly to Kevin, not harshly. I had said what needed to be said through the ruling. What remained was something different. "Mr. Holloway," I said, "you started helping your uncle because you cared about him. I believe that. The first time you showed up with groceries, the first time you drove him to a doctor's appointment, that was real. That mattered." He was looking at the table. He lifted his eyes. "Somewhere along the way," I continued, "you made a small, dishonest choice, and then let it grow instead of correcting it. You chose your own convenience over your uncle's dignity, and when the consequences arrived, you let him carry them. That is a serious thing, not because of the money, because of who you chose to let bear the weight." He pressed his lips together. "The relationship you had with him before this," I said quietly, "you built that, and you are the only one who can decide what you do with what's left of it. But whatever comes next has to start with honesty, with him, not a lawyer's version of the truth, the real one." Kevin nodded slowly. His eyes were wet. I do not know what he said to his uncle after leaving my courtroom. I do not know if Walter forgave him, or whether forgiveness was even something Walter was ready to consider. Those were not my decisions to make. They belonged to the two of them. What I do know is this. Walter Greer walked into my courtroom carrying $14,000 of debt that someone else had created in his name. He walked out owing nothing. And he walked out the same way he walked in. Slowly, carefully, cane in hand, head held straight, with dignity intact. That is what this work is for. Moments like that one, Not the drama of exposure or the satisfaction of a ruling. The quiet restoration of what belongs to a person who had it taken. Walter called the clerk's office 2 weeks later to confirm the record had been cleared. The clerk told me he had said thank you 3 times before hanging up. 3 times. For something that should never have been necessary in the first place. I have thought about this case often since that day, about how vulnerable the people we love can make us. Not because love is weakness. It is not. But because trust, real trust, opens a door. And doors that are opened in good faith can be walked through badly. The elderly, the disabled, the people who need help with the things the rest of us take for granted. They are not foolish for accepting help. They are not naive for trusting family. They are human beings doing what human beings do, extending a hand toward other human beings and hoping the hand extended back is honest. When it is not, the harm is not just financial. It is the injury to something fundamental, the belief that care is real, that family means what it says it means, that the people closest to you are the ones who will not use your limitations against you. Walter trusted his nephew because he had no reason not to. He should not have needed to come to my courtroom to find that out. But since he did, since the system brought him to my bench, I am grateful I could give him this one thing: the truth, clearly spoken, fully documented, and the $14,000 he never should have owed. If this story reminded you that protecting the vulnerable is not optional, it is the foundation of a decent society, leave the word dignity in the comments right now. And if you know someone who is quietly carrying a weight they should not have to carry alone, reach out to them today, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can give someone is simply the knowledge that somebody sees what is happening and is paying attention.